Welcome to the Gravel Lot, the place where bikes are for everyone.
The Gravel Lot podcast is presented by Be Free Ride Bikes Apparel, providing a fully customized cycling apparel experience to provide you and your team the attention to detail and personal touch that you deserve.
And also brought to you by Grimpour Brothers Coffee, offering handmade coffee roasted weekly in small batches to give you the finest quality coffee to start your day. Choose their subscription service and earn your free bag of coffee today.
And by Hand Up Gloves. Great gear, better times. Providing a wide range of apparel for bikes, snow sports, and golf in multiple designs and fits to let your personality shine.
Our goal with the Gravel Lot is to inspire cyclists of all stripes to ride bikes, share their story, and have fun. We love all bikes and anyone who wants to ride them. So no matter where you sit on the spectrum of bikes, we'll always have a place for you in the Gravel Lot.
And now, the hosts of TGL, John Woolry and Doug McClintock.
Hello and welcome back to the Gravel Lot, where we just described to you what our show is about. I'm John, that's Doug, and to build on kind of the premise of what the Gravel Lot is about, let's talk about why we are here today, why we're here every other week, and why we are coming back constantly. Is Doug and I think almost every one of our guests that we've ever had on the show, probably all of them without, putting words in their mouth, would say that the only thing better than going out and enjoying a great bike ride is to enjoy that same bike ride with your group of friends. Tell stories, make fun of each other, share life's experiences together, and just basically do it together as a community. And that's what the Gravel Lot is all about. We love digging into the stories, letting people tell their own stories and kind of give them runway to share who they are with you guys. Whether it's an athlete you've heard of or it's somebody that you may not know anything about, we love bringing new people to you guys and just sharing how awesome and rich and colorful our cycling community is. So that is, in a nutshell, the Gravel Lot. So let's dig into it today. Whether you are a new Pebble or an existing Pebble, welcome to the show. We are so thankful. We love that you come back. We love that you're here. This is a huge passion project for both Doug and I, and it is something we feel privileged and blessed to be able to make for you guys, but also the fact that you keep downloading it and engaging with it is amazing for us as well. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for joining us on our therapy each and every other Tuesday. We really appreciate it because otherwise we'd just be talking into the void. But we appreciate you being here for our therapy sessions. It's fantastic. We have a different guest therapist every week.
Yeah.
So if you like hearing from our guest therapists, please show us a little bit of support. Hit the like button, subscribe to us, engage, share this show with the people that you ride bikes with, the people that make those stories and those memories with you. Share this show with them and say, hey, I heard this on the Gravel Lot. You should really listen to this. This is great. This is a good piece of it. Share your favorite insights in those spaces. We love to have that shared around. That's how we get new Pebbles into the Gravel Lot, right? That's how this works. So if you're in the live stream, leave your comments below so that we can grab those. We'll try to get those to our guest. Check out our website, go to our Etsy store, go support us on Patreon. If you can do that, that would be awesome. That helps us fund things like the studio build out, which is currently undergoing. It is a budget build out, but every little shekel helps. So please send along if you do. Also, make sure to visit all the partners we mentioned in the intro. Hand Up dropping new stuff today. The spring collection is out. If you have not seen it, go right now to their website.
This is probably the biggest collection, I think, of updated items.
Biggest drop.
Normally they'll be like, oh, here's our spring collection and there's one or two new things, but this is there's 5 new socks and 8 new pairs of gloves and new flannels and new pants, and I think I went through the email for 10 minutes and then was looking at all the new stuff on the website, and I was like, okay,
also,
this is
as an aside, I would like to just share this with you, Pebbles. A few former guest and good friend of the show and supporter of TGL in so many ways, Medi at State. They dropped the Wu-Tang bike collection last week, and if you have not checked that out and you are a fan of the Wu-Tang Clan, you best get up in that piece.
I would hope that the Pebbles have already seen it. I would hope that the Pebbles understand the life that is Wu. I hope they realize. When I saw that, I was like, yeah. There was no I think any other brand you'd be like, come on. But then when it was right? Yeah. When it was State and knowing Medi and knowing what they're all about and everything that company stands for, and it was that's perfect. That's the only company that could do it.
Absolutely, 100%. So go check that out if you haven't. Just want to give him a plug. He's been done a lot of awesome stuff for us. John and I are both riding states this year. We decided that it was time for us to move our transactional business away. So we're very stoked. We'll be giving some reveals of our bike builds and what we've done and what we're working on as spring rolls out and we actually get out of the house. Yeah. So make sure to hit us on all the social platforms, contact us on the website, or hit us up at our phone number 513-400-5577. We'd be happy to do that. I've belabored this too long. John, how have you been? How's the ride?
This was the closest we've ever come to missing an episode of TGL. So for any of the folks on the live stream or watching the YouTube video in future, we missed last week's recording because I was laying on my bathroom floor. Not with COVID, whatever the stomach bug that's going around knocked me out, completely immobile for 2 days and probably put me on my back foot for like a solid 6 days. So, I'm just now starting to feel normal again. So this is good medicine for me. But it started on the day that we were supposed to record and it would not have gone well. We would have not delivered what you guys expect out of us. But for the podcast listeners, you're not going to know any different because we're still going to deliver.
You would have been delivering a lot of things that no one expected to see come out of you on the show. Had you shown up, it would have been very difficult.
It would have been a hell of a live stream for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, do not adjust the color on your TV sets because that is the actual color that I am.
Broken some FCC rules, I am sure.
Yeah. But no, it's good. I'm ready for spring. Like I'm just like winter, like seasonal depression, just feeling unmotivated, feeling overwhelmed by just basic decisions of life and all the stuff that we've been talking about for months now. And I'm just ready for it to be done and to feel like I have a light or like some sort of like internal go again. But yeah, looking forward to it. It's finally starting to get nice. It's supposed to be in the 60s this week. It got really pretty today.
It wasn't dark when we started recording.
Yeah. It's actually like just now getting dark out. So there is light at the end of the tunnel, but that's me. I mean, I was sick for a week, so there's not really a whole lot for me to catch up on. Doug, what about you?
We're entering the third trimester.
Yeah, you are.
Things are really real. Ellen's killing it. Ellen's doing amazing. But she's popping like nothing, no one's business. I was playing D&D last night and I used the same setup and like she like comes in the room and starts popping her baby bump on screen to all my friends who play D&D and they were all dying. That won't happen on this show, but it was kind of funny. But she's doing awesome. She's kicking ass. We're just getting ready, right? Like there's so many things to be done. The biggest thing is for the past couple weekends, I've been hardcore building out the studio. I have got studs up. Everything's electrically wired. Had to drop in new stuff into my panel. Don't tell the inspector. And so this weekend, it's drywall and insulation in the ceiling and the walls, and then paint, foam, and we test fire it. So maybe not our next recording. Which is actually next week, but probably the recording following it. John and I may be test firing from the studio. So we'll see. We'll see if you can not hear my dogs jumping around upstairs.
So I'm trying to think. The last time that we recorded in Doug's house was it? It wasn't Otto that was snoring. Was it Cameron?
Yeah, it was Otto snoring. Yeah.
He was the dulcet tones snoring, behind Grant.
Yeah.
So episode 2.
I've recorded in that house post when I did Batty and whatnot because we had to do it remote. But like, it's been a hot minute. So
so we're gonna be back in the studio. I think that's gonna be a big help of feeling like reconnected to TGL. But yeah, I think I've gotten some really good emails this week. I think all that stuff helps because I think both Doug and I are struggling with like keeping the foot on the gas and keeping this thing going after.
I got a good phone call on the way home after a pretty crappy day. So we got something exciting we'll be able to share with you soon. So it'll be good stuff. But yeah, good. Everything's good. Everything's fine. We're gonna be fine. Everything's fine. Everything's fine. I mean, the
And not
world's a
like the like
disaster.
drinking a cup of coffee while the world's on fire. Well, the world is on fire.
Correct,
Um,
technically.
yeah.
All shout outs to everybody across the world who's suffering through whatever they're suffering through right now, whether it's COVID or your country is war torn, whether it is Ukraine or it is another location in the world that is suffering right now. Yeah, world ain't great, but we're all got to try to take care of each other. So as long as we're doing that, just take care of the people's close to you that you can, and worry about them and worry about their mental health. That's all we can really be doing right now. So focus on that, and we should be good. So.
Yeah, that's a whole that's a whole podcast in itself. We're not
It
going
is.
into
It is.
geopolitical politics.
No, we can totally. The politics podcast comes later. So, well, I think without any further ado, it's time to bring in this week's guest, because I am super, super, super stoked. Let's see if this works. Fantastic. So this week we are delighted to finally get an interview that I know I've been longing for a long time. At least over a year we've been trying to get this thing set up, but schedules, we've been all crazy. We're all so busy, but we finally nailed it. Our guest this week is the dedicated zinester of one of the most awesome publications in the entirety of cycling, CYCLISTA Zine. You may not even know right now what a zine is or what zines are, but we will cover that.
That's okay.
Stuff. Yeah, it's okay.
That's
you
why
don't
we're
have
here.
to know that. Yeah,
No
we're here
judgment.
yeah, we'll provide you with that roadmap. Suffice it to say, she is dutifully creating a space to platform disruptive narratives, knowledge, and skill sharing within cycling and the entire outdoor world. She is Kwaisun descendant of the Tejon Indian Reservation, and Chicana born and raised in California. She is now in New York, but she is a cyclist, a mobility justice advocate, an educator on self-publishing zines, and we are absolutely over the moon to welcome Christina Torres to the Gravel Lot. Christina, welcome to TGL.
Thank you. Thank you. Happy to be here. An honor.
I feel like we say that a lot when we're talking about like, oh, it's been a long time planning, because first off, we do, the longtime listeners of the show know that I like planning our show out well in advance so we know what's coming. And by we, I mean me, because Doug doesn't like to plan.
Seat of pants.
Yes, but this one was very much, I feel like we were having initial conversations in like the end of 2020 when we first reached out to try and bring you on the show. And then you had some family things, and then we had some scheduling conflicts, and then I got sick last week, and it's like, is this ever going to happen? But thankfully you were amenable to rescheduling, and here we are today. So we are very, very thankful that you're flexible, and you're awesome, and we're excited to have you on TGL and talk about how awesome you are.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, there was some conflict, but we're here, and that's,
That's all that matters.
History. The rest is history.
Yeah. Right now we just get to make this fun audio / video commentary for everybody. So, well, awesome. You have listened to the show. You are a loyal Pebble, and we do appreciate that, which is excellent. Pebbles all around. It is exciting to always start with this question, because I think this is where we all kind of start. So where did you discover bikes? Was it when you were growing up as a kid? What is your relationship to bikes in the early part of your life? And how did this become ingrained in your world? Was that part of things for you?
Well, I wouldn't say that bikes were like in my family DNA, if that makes sense. I know a lot of people like have those stories.
Sure.
But I think for a lot of us growing up, they were things for fun. They were things to play with. And I have very early memories of my sisters, all three of us trying to teach each other how to ride a bike. And it was like my sister had gotten a bike, and we all got really excited. And, my big sister teaching the younger ones of us, trying to like pedal, how to balance and look out for cars. So we were all, collectively like trying to help each other learn how to ride. And because my sisters were older than me, I would try to sneak in practices in our backyard so I can learn faster than them.
So you're stealing your older sister's bike to try to like get ahead of the curve?
Yes.
Nice.
So it was just, I was always wanting to do things by like on my own, if that makes sense. You know, like you have very like kids who are just like very independent, want to do things on their own. I was definitely like that. Like, mom, I can take care of myself in the bathroom. It's just fine. Like, just go away.
Yeah.
So, like,
Were you the youngest of three then? Is that, or do you have
I'm
other
the
siblings?
youngest of three girls, and I have a brother.
Okay.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
so you're the youngest of three girls. Is your brother younger than you?
He's 6 years younger than me. So
Oh, wow.
there's a gap there where I was the youngest for a very long time. And so the youngest child, yeah.
And just when you were adapting to being special, here he
Yep.
comes and takes your pride away. So like roughly about how old are we talking between when you're telling these stories of how old were you, and then like what's the difference in age between you and your sisters?
So we're about a year and a half apart, each of us. And by the time we were riding bikes, I must have been 5, at least 5.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, this is I think the short PSA. This is the one type of theft that we will condone on the gravel lot is stealing siblings' bikes to go play cyclocross in the backyard. I think that is very much like we'll put the seal of approval on that one, because no one gets hurt in that situation. No one gets hurt.
I did not get hurt. No, I
right.
did not.
You fall in grass and you're 5. Like
Yeah.
like everybody younger than 18 is made of bubblegum and magic, but there's like a balance of like how much bubblegum and how much magic, and like when you're 5 it's mostly magic, so there's no getting hurt.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But I'm like, I think for a lot of us, we kind of grew up like riding bikes with our neighbors and our cousins. Yeah, and that was a big thing, like with our cousins, just kind of racing each other like on the dirt roads, or just kind of taking turns like trying to do BMX tricks, which we didn't know what those were back in the day. It's like one of those bikes where you had to like pedal and you had to stop with the pedal.
Yeah. Skid in the rear wheel. I mean, that was the best thing. Flat spots on the rear wheel for sure.
Exactly. So there was a lot of play, and then as a child, but then like still kind of kept bikes around, like even as a teenager. Like I begged my mom for a bike, and she got me this cheap little Huffy bike, purple and pink bike from like Walmart. And so I would ride that thing to the library. I would sometimes ride it to school. I would ride it to friends' houses. So I had to wear a helmet and I had to stay on the sidewalks, but I always felt like bikes kind of featured in my youth in some manner. But it really wasn't till college that I got really serious about commuting by bike.
Well, it seems like you're kind of maybe unknowingly checking a lot of the boxes as like a commuter cyclist when you were a kid, because you don't like, I think that's a thing that a lot of people forget. We were like, oh, I just rode a bike around as a kid, but it's like you commuted around all of the important things in your life. You just happen to be a kid, like, so you don't view it. You were just like, I was just riding my bike. Yeah, you couldn't right. Get in a car. You didn't have a bus pass. Like, you didn't have a lot of those things, so you rode your bike around. So it's interesting to hear people kind of describe it the way that you describe it. Like, well, I didn't really get serious until college. And I'm like, well, you're just telling me you're just riding to the library, you're riding to school, you're riding to here, you're going to like, and you're like already doing it. So what for you differentiates riding your bike kind of to the library when you were a kid? And I'm almost 40 and I still feel like I'm still a kid. So I don't know, like, when you make that transition. But for you then, when you're talking about taking it more seriously in college, what did that mean? Like, how do you quantify that, or how do you look back on that as like, what was the tipping point that made it feel more serious?
I think it's the dependency that bikes became for me. Where as a kid, it was more like an optional, an option way of getting from A to B. Like I could ask my mom easily, can you drive me to the library? But I think as an adult and young adult, I think bikes became, I had to commute, and I couldn't afford to pay for the train pass, the monthly train pass, because the prices were going high. And this was during the 2008 financial crash.
Oh,
And
yeah, sure.
I was living in San Francisco at the time.
Oh.
And so, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Look, no one can afford anything in San Francisco right now. Let's be
not
clear.
anymore.
No.
Even in 2008, that was a tough call. Like, I wouldn't have been picked there to move. Like, economical decision, move to San Francisco. This seems like I'll be saving money here. Yeah, no.
I had been living in San Francisco for 4 years by then. So I had lived there and moved there in 2004 for college, for Berkeley. And just the cost of living had made this huge shift. The cost of transportation had this huge shift, and the fallback was kind of like, well, I either move closer to work, which I don't want to live in the central of San Francisco, and like in Market Street or anything like that. And I had a really good little apartment at the time. Rent was good before they went crazy. And then I think just having a commuter bike really kind of made getting to work and school more accessible and more affordable. Like, I didn't have to spend an extra $80 a month for a bus or a train pass. And for a student, that's like 2 weeks of food at the time.
Legitimately. What were you studying in college at Berkeley and post? Like, what were you up to at that point in your life as bikes kind of became the real transportation cog for you?
So in the beginning, I went into Berkeley going to get my degree in English Lit. And having gone through the experience of like just cycling and then doing that for so long, I think the literature and then reading all this historical facts about cities and how authors and poets like Baudelaire, like, were talking about how the Industrial Revolution was really changing the landscape of cities and the experiences that people, especially working class people in Paris specifically, were having such a rough time adapting to like adverts, boulevards, and all this huge infrastructural change that was coming at the time. And then you kind of had the same thing going on in other cities in America, like New York and San Francisco and Los Angeles. So all those, it kind of bridged the whole city and the city and the literature part. And I think my experiences of living in the city and observing and experiencing kind of came in, blended in with that. And at the same time, I was also doing some advocacy stuff for San Francisco Bicycle Coalition. And I think the more involved I got with that too, I got more serious about planning and wanting to also switch my major, because the English department was losing a lot of money and there were no opportunities for students anymore. And I needed to find something that I knew I would have some sort of post graduate opportunity. I just didn't think at that point that the program was going to give me what I needed to thrive after I graduated. So going into city planning or sustainable development at the time, that was going to push me forward in a different direction, where I was blending in bikes and I was blending in literature and everything else with that. And it's interesting the way all of it has come together, because it's really even put this zine into perspective for me and really put mobility justice in there as well. So I've been able to kind of bring everything, all of my experiences and all of my passions into this project.
So
Man,
so
love that.
before we jump into the zines, because I think that's a nice segue to talk about what are they, where do they come from, how did you discover them, all of that stuff. But there's one kind of cog of what you just described that I want to pick apart a little bit. Is you talked about what led you into city planning and sustainable development and what led you into commuting, but we haven't touched on this thing that is going to be the crux of, I think, a lot of your creative outlets for the foreseeable future, and a lot of what we're going to talk about today is what led you to English Lit when you chose Berkeley to go to college. Like what about growing up led you to lean into that as your major going into school?
I love to read, as you know. I
Best
love
background on the podcast, bar none. Like nobody has brought it this hard. Like this is some like Room Raider. Where is Room Raider? This is like 12 out of 10.
Yeah,
Room
yeah.
Raider.
thank you. I love to read, and I have a very early experience as a child of going to books and reading as a refuge. Um, Books became a refuge in the sense where, my parents had divorced, when I was 6 years old, and we had moved into a new town, and it was very hard to make friends. A lot of the kids that I went to school with were migrant children, so their families worked on the farms, and that's kind of the makeup of like where I grew up, as well as migrant children. And they spoke very good Spanish. I had very broken Spanish, and so it was hard to make friends. And when I was enrolled in my first day, my teacher spoke plain Spanish to me, and I actually couldn't speak full Spanish to her. And she was like, Christina, like, can you speak Spanish? And I said, just poquito. I can only understand it. I can understand it, but I can't speak it well. And
That's me with Portuguese. I can like figure out what you're talking about, but I cannot compose a sentence for the life of me.
That's me
I
with
can
English.
navigate, I can read maps, but don't
Yes.
ask me to like talk to you.
Yes. So she asked me to just sit in a corner, and she gave me all these books to just read. But again, even when I had tried to make friends, it was still very hard to kind of break that barrier of language. And so books just kind of became the refuge at the time, especially like post parents divorce and stuff. I think as a 6-year-old, you don't really understand stuff, but I do think that you do feel the shifts and the changes that go on in the family. It's just not easy to understand and have clarity at the age. But I just stood with it, just stood reading, growing up, and I just had such a fervor for like just reading books all the time. And yeah, my sisters would make fun of me sometimes. If like,
I back that. I'm a big reader too. Like I was a big reader as a kid. Like my mom was an English major at Villanova. Like, and she's like, yes, being an English major, a degree that I can do absolutely nothing with. It was like my sister was a communications manager, right? Generation later, my mom's like, that's the English degree of your generation, Kate. This is like a whole thing. What did you like envision that you wanted to do with that? Did you want to do research? Did you want to write? What was your passion around that? Or were you just trying to figure it out?
No, I wanted to teach. I
love it.
I wanted to teach. I wanted to teach English Lit. That was the goal, was to teach English Lit and to get students riled up and passionate about literature and history and art. And there's so much that overlaps into it. And there was a point in one of my theses where I just went down this rabbit hole of the lost generation. So like we talk about post World War I, and we're talking about the disruption of communities and cities and the American Americans leaving the US because of prohibition, and they're going to other countries, and they're just getting drunk and writing amazing
Right. Yeah.
literature.
Yeah. Exactly.
And I found that so interesting, because it was such a shift in the time. It's such a shift of the way the world was shaping after war. And I think people all over the world, artists especially, are trying to express themselves through those times. They were trying to share the shift of change that was coming in post World War I, and going into World War II, because the Lost Generation is right in between World War I and World War II. So that generation just got me so excited to just, I went to Paris just so I can go to a bookshop. That's how.
I mean, it's a seminal era in literature for sure.
So this kind of leads me to this question. The way that I have my suspicion based on how you told the story, but did you envision yourself going back and being a lit teacher to younger kids, to middle school kids, to high school kids? Because where I'm going with this is the way that you told the story about your teacher saying, "Do you speak Spanish? Okay, go read the books." I read that as it was being dismissive because she didn't know what to do with you. And is there something to your story of I want to kind of get a second crack at taking that opportunity to engage a kid in this love affair that I have with books?
I think it's a bit of maybe the latter, also mixed in with doing the whole high school thing as well, like teaching high school students to get passionate about
anybody that can do that. Like, my hat's off, because the way that you were describing what you wanted to do, I was gonna say thank you, Mrs. Dunham, because that was who did it for me. Was my she would have been my freshman English lit teacher, somebody that did exactly talked about things the exact same way that you were. It wasn't just read the book and let's talk about the book. It was, let's talk about what the book means and how it sits in kind of the historical sphere of everything, and where it came from, and what cascaded after it, and just taking young minds and challenging them into a situation where trying to get them to understand the global scope of, it's not Of Mice and Men, or it's not To Kill a Mockingbird, or it's not insert standard operating reading here. It's how does it connect to everything that's around it, that came before it, that came after it, and then what's going on geopolitically, and really challenging. Granted, it was an AP class, but it's the first time in my life that somebody had come at me and said okay, I'm not just going to make you read this book. I'm going to read this book, and that's going to be the easy part of the conversation. We're going to really dig into this to figure out, to make you a critical thinker and help you understand why this thing is so important, outside of the fact that it's, an amazing 276 pages or whatever it is.
Exactly. And you hit the spot, just saying the critical thinking aspect of reading, the critical aspect of analyzing text. I think that's a skill that we don't I feel like we don't prioritize building that anymore, because I think especially now, in the digital age, we just passively consume media, that we don't really take enough time to step back and think and observe, or learn, try to dig more into a topic, and then we just really just express whatever the hell just comes on top of our head, and that's not a critical analysis.
Yeah, I have probably a whole 18-minute.
Twitter's not a critical analysis, Christina?
Yeah, sure? I mean, I probably have a whole 18-minute TED talk on social media mixed in with No Child Left Behind Act, and how it's gonna continuously ruin us from just a cultural perspective, because all we're doing is training kids to take tests and to hit a criteria so schools can get funding, and et cetera, et cetera. And it's not doing what we're talking about here of of trying to see the whole board and realizing that there isn't always an answer for everything. There's actually very rarely an answer for anything.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think something you said that's interesting in there is about how you really care about, it's just the overall arching feeling about the context which within things verbally or written live, and how that is something that you're passionate about. And I think, as someone who came through the punk world, right, I've been exposed to zines and whatnot, but I think the zine is kind of an interesting contextual piece of information that has a lot of those layers. And I find it interesting that years on, right, past your secondary and post-secondary education, right, becoming involved in the planning world and really being engaged with that, you come to a form of writing and engagement that is very different than what I think a lot of other people may necessarily approach. Where did your exposure, well, first off, explain what a zine is. For those people who don't know what a zine is, you got to explain what a zine is. And right, let's go to school, because Christina, that is apparently what you were intended to do. Explain what that is for folks and level set that. But then also, how did you find out about this? Was this something that was exposed to you, and where did that come from, and why did this become something that you gravitated towards?
Yeah. So I'll start how I was exposed to zines, and then I'll get onto how I gravitated towards them. And so like I myself was really into punk music growing up as well. And I would go to shows with friends, and usually my friends were a little bit older than me at the time. So
we can make a playlist for this episode if you want to. We did it with Tara. Tara made a playlist. It was the thing. We can do it. It's a whole thing. We'll do it. We'll talk out offline about that.
Yes, we will. And so I would go to these, these shows, and it would just be like a punk fest, like in San Francisco, for example. And we would, at the time, it was like more, you had a blend of punk and the indie scene, DIY scene kind of mixing at the time. And I think zines were a big part of like the punk movement already, but also it was like almost post riot girl era as well. So zines were still being used, but they were also being used to highlight like women's bands specifically. And that's how I got exposed to zines. Like I would go to these shows and then see them like on a merch table, and then I would grab a few, and then there'd be more of these women's bands that were coming up, and I'm like, I want to know more about these bands. So then you have all these zines, like you had Bus Zine that really highlighted like women in music, and then you had Venus, and then you had Bitch Mag, but at the time was a zine. So there was like these shifts happening culturally, and zines were such a big part of that. So going to these shows, I was really exposed to that. But then like buying these zines really exposed me to the DIY culture, like DIY making culture of either zines or like feminist communities and feminist organizing. And because they talked a lot about those types of that culture. So zines just kind of maintained, throughout my life, and always kind of kept them around, go to like zine fest, like in the city, or I had friends and I who would like exchange zines. But I had friends who were so passionate about the Riot Girl scene. So we would always talk about, Huggy Bear or other bands. And so like, oh, look, this new zine that came out. So we would just kind of peruse the zines together. And just the words were just so hardcore, because it's like how I learned the word feminist was through a zine. And those, like the I would say the things that they expressed, the way these zinesters would tell their stories or express themselves, like either their music or or through the zines was like something I had never seen before.
Yeah, there's like a rawness to it. There's like a honesty and a rawness in a way that you don't get when it gets washed by commercial media.
All right, so let's pause for a second before we
just
get
like, yes.
Well, you guys are like,
gnarly.
I'm seeing the train kind of go over the crest of the first hill, and I want to like stop it before we actually start to let gravity take over. So before we get too far down the road, for all of us folks who may not know exactly, I'm trying to connect with the folks right now. They're like, what? Are we talking about magazines, or what are we talking about here? So let's do the 101 on what is a zine, and kind of whatever history you know about kind of where they originated beyond kind of the punk scene that we're talking about here. Just so folks know what we're talking about when we're talking about DIY culture and zines, and I discovered them here. I traded them with my friends here. So like let's cover that. I don't want to like interject and kill the mood.
No, it's important. It's important.
But I don't want to leave anybody behind.
The people need to know. The people need to. So zines, the way I like to describe them, are the inextricable, life-affirming granting of permission to speak in print. So basically, they're just like a method of DIY printing. So they are non-commercial. You do them with a little piece of paper. You can put them together with your community or anyone, and it could be about anything, any topic. You can copy and paste things from a magazine onto them, but they're just little pamphlets, paper pamphlets, or they could be like what CYCLISTA Zine creates to tell their story, and those stories can be about anything. So it's not a traditional magazine. So sorry, the dog's trying to get up on the couch. No.
Well, we're fine with that. If the dog joins us, the dog can always join us. We're here for dogs. Dogs are part of part of our world. If the dog wants to get on the couch, then the dog comes to the podcast.
Okay. Well, we'll see if he decides afterwards. So they're just pamphlets. So just DIY pamphlets of little papers or pamphlets to write and express anything, whether that's, politics, expressing yourself, or writing about any subject in the world. It could be a recipe. It could be a journal piece that you write specifically about some topic. It could be a zine about the lost generation. It could be a number of topics, but it's not mass media produced.
Right.
And there's no one censoring your language or censoring the presentation of it. And the zine community is generally, I would say, identified by a marginalized group. So it can be people who have different genders or are Black, Indigenous, people of color. They're usually created so that groups can get their message across. So whether it be political or whether it be just a story that they want to share, that's what a zine functions.
So now looping it back to, this is where you can get somebody telling their truth on paper that can be disseminated to others outside or within the community. That's not, Doug, to use, I think you were the one that said that it's not washed, it's not sanitized, it doesn't have a commercial spin on it, it's not sold to advertisers, it is like the absolute, like,
it's printed at your Kinko's by you on a Saturday,
right,
when the Kinko's guy is not looking. Most
raw form of communication that is not being run through major media outlets. And to me, it's I've always experienced them as they're the quickest way to find what's actually going on and what's actually being said or being felt, because there's kind of a commodification with modern media around whatever the outrage du jour is, or whatever the challenge du jour is for like domestically. So it's really difficult to find well written, like, emotional pieces in major media outlets that aren't somehow being edited or being sanitized or being scrubbed of anything that could potentially be viewed as uncomfortable for the average consumer.
Exactly. And zines, especially during the feminist movement, just giving a little bit of history behind it, especially during the Riot Girl scene, you had all these punk bands during the 70s that were using zines to kind of share like underground music and underground like bands. However, there was a lot of like gender exclusion that did exist in the scene as well. And um, you know, the big groups just getting pushed and pushed commercially, where it's like you had these bands who had been around a lot longer than these bigger bands who didn't get the media attention or the support that they needed to keep doing the work that they wanted to do. So zines kind of became a way to share underground scenes that were emerging at the time. And I think with Riot Girl, they the bands had shared what they were experiencing in the punk scene, like the sexism, the rape culture that was coming out of it as well, just the exclusionary culture of the punk scene that was happening. And you know, X-Ray Specs, yeah, a really good example of huge in the UK, and a racially mixed woman who was part of this huge scene and in the UK with the punk music, and really tried to express herself the way she felt was necessary for her. But she got a lot of pushback, especially her being, you know, a half Black woman and having to go through her experiences with her identity and being in the UK and being in the punk scene as well. And she created something, a culture amazing through speaking her truth through her music, and which was very political. And that just continued to emerge within the punk scene with the Riot Girl scene. And a lot of bands were just expressing what they were feeling and just really just trying to say, hey, like, we need to talk about these issues that are going in the punk scene because, you know, this is an oppressive culture within our culture. So
Yeah,
the history of that.
I think it's interesting how you see those things crop up in kind of, just if we want to talk like in the larger punk culture, whether it's hardcore or the Riot Girl scene or whatever, there's all these different spaces where there are exclusionary tactics, and we see those throughout our society in other spaces. But it's interesting when you see them operate in those areas where you have, like, you know, the rise of veganism and straight edge in this really massive way, which is also massively exclusionary in so many other so many things. Don't search me in straight edge on the internet. Like, I have my dark history. But there's it's very interesting when you see how all these pieces coalesce, but there's always been somebody else putting out a different zine willing to tell their side of the story and that space. And I think that's fascinating. Where did you draw the line between your work in cycling and this punk DIY space and zines and say, okay,
yeah, Venn diagram time,
right?
Yeah,
right.
like at what point do they cross over?
Where does the overlap happen? How do you draw this line and say, okay, this thing works in this environment, maybe it works over here? Because obviously now down the road we know it does, but like, where did you get that idea from? Why did you think this could potentially be powerful in this space?
Well, so during the time that I was living in San Francisco, I had this blog, which was a women's cycling blog called City Girl Rides. And this was a time I started this when there was a time when women's kit, women's bikes, all this stuff did not exist. Like it did not have the scene that it does now. And it was very non-existent world where for women to access cycling.
It's barely gotten better, to be clear, but we're at least on the road.
Yes. So I had this blog, but I had met other women through the blog where we were able to digitally kind of share information and share skills for like bike commuting or like bike style for commuting, etc. So we were able to like disseminate information through blogging and through these cultures online. However, even when like the emerging culture, I would say the road cycling culture was like emerging at a time that got really big, and especially in cycling media. And they were just selling road cycling like all the time. And it kind of lost the DIY culture of the cycling scene. So it became like hyper commercialized, like even as things were emerging. And cultures like, you know, we used to call it touring instead of bike packing.
Right. Yeah.
Just like
riding a bike instead of gravel.
Yes. And just all these movements, like the slow movement, all, you know, even just commuting or like just all the issues that kind of existed in that world that even though we're so small at the time, like they just kind of got sucked all the way back, like out of any, I would say, social dialogue in the cycling world. And it like, I would say just the hyper commercialization of road cycling just got so big. And I think a lot of us, just friends that I had talked to through the blog, like we didn't identify with that culture, and we didn't think it was going to be helpful for helping other people to get into cycling, because it's very homogenized way of cycling. And we just tried our best to keep building the communities like online and sharing as much information online. So that I kept that going for a while, but then I kind of stepped out of it. But even with more conversations in like bike clubs that I was having with friends in New York, and even they were just expressing like, yeah, it just, we don't fit into that scene, or I don't want to have to wear that when I go biking, or I don't want to have to do this, or there's just a lot of those types of dialogues that I was feeling that were being had often, and that the bigger nature of the cycling culture, what was not a space that people, especially women, could see themselves as a part of. And having gone through like the DIY nature of like having to learn how to commute, how to like fix my bike, I would not go into a bike shop because of, I would just hated going into a bike shop.
I still kind of do, and I know the people that own them, and I'm like, I still love you, but I do not want to come in here.
Yeah, just the nature of the culture was just not welcoming. Yeah. And I think that the idea of the zine, having had experience of cycling in the city, like here in New York, having a lot of conversations and building community with like other folks, we went through a period in 2019. I'm sorry, I'm jumping forward, but we went through a period in 2019 where the rise of like cycling deaths were just getting higher and higher and higher. But those statistics didn't really reflect who was impacted by those deaths. And it was usually immigrant men and other POC who were needing to commute by bike to work. And even the cycling media was not highlighting any of their stories. And I think that just broke me, because I knew I had friends that were using their bikes for commuting, and having been someone who had to depend on their bike for work. I think it just got a little bit more and more intense, that feeling of just like, why aren't these stories being told?
Well, those stories from your perspective because
Yeah,
you've lived it.
I mean, it's one thing to kind of be living your life, and you have your own little, like your own small sphere of experiences, and you're like, okay, well, I know that there's probably other people that are experiencing the same thing, because I see that this sucks, which I'm sure that it sucks for other people. But when you have those very distinct emotional connections with somebody else, and they tell you exactly what is going on already in your own head, you're like, I'm not crazy. Like, I might have thought that I was 99% sure, but now I am 100% sure that this is bullshit. And now I feel confident, like, moving forward with, like, okay, how am I going to Kool-Aid man something into existence, into, like, proving that
all this shit bullshit.
Yeah, to call all of this out, and to really give space or give platform to these stories. And it's not, I mean, there's so many episodes we have taken cracks at specific cycling magazines and saying that, an entry-level bike is $4,000, and our average consumer of this magazine is, household income of $260,000, or whatever the crazy ass numbers are. But the cycling world as a whole has a, like, really skewed version of itself. And I don't know if it's like a keeping up with the Joneses thing, or if it's aspirational, and it somewhere along the lines, everybody lost track of the plot. But there was just there's the majority of cyclists are left out of cycling media. And it's only been in the last probably year, I feel like, that I've started
maybe two?
Like when I'm cruising the grocery store, and well, that sounded real weird. Cruising around the grocery store.
John cruises the grocery store.
Yeah,
This is what we learned today is John cruises at the grocery store.
Damn, I love you, Amanda. But like when you like go through the magazine aisle, and like I'll pick up a Bicycling, or I'll pick up a Vela News, or I'll pick up, something, and just flip through it just to see, just like calibrate, like the 30-second calibration of what's going on. And I feel like there's starting to be some of those things. And I know that the Titanic can't turn on a dime, but it was, I mean, when I got it, like, actually felt like I got into cycling in like the 08, 09, right around there, it was like kind of just a dick measuring contest in cycling media. Like that's really the best way that I can describe it. Yeah. And we're just now getting to this point where it's like, oh, I see you, and I acknowledge that you exist, and I want to talk about it. Like, the fact that that's like lauded is kind of disheartening. Like, it's progress is progress, and that's amazing that on a larger scale we're seeing it. But you can only deal with that so long before you're like, I have the ability to do something about this. I know an amazing avenue, an amazing venue to access it, and I have an existing group of folks that are already rabid for this.
Let's get after it.
Right.
Yeah. You touched on like how when you would pick up a magazine that you wouldn't see these other cultures, like other bike cultures in it. And when I would pick up one of those magazines, I would look to see how many women were in there.
Right.
How many women look like me in there?
Right.
Yeah. That's the other thing that always bugged me, that everyone, and again, this is something that Doug and I fully acknowledge. We are two middle-aged white dudes with a podcast. Like, we got it. Like, I hear you.
We are that demographic.
Right. But in looking through those magazines, all I saw was myself. I don't want to see myself. Like, I want to see other people enjoying this thing that I like. And I want to see it have broad appeal. And I want to get other people. We start a podcast because we want to talk about how much we love bikes. You start a zine because you want to tell people how much you love bikes and you want to share it with people. I don't need more middle-aged white dudes like thrown at me as like, this is what cycling is. Like,
I've already made John
I'm
my
doing
best
it.
friend. I've already made John my best friend. I don't need any more middle-aged white people.
All filled up. We're all filled up.
Filled up. We've hit quota.
That. But just the point that you're making too is that you see how like you see how cycling media is pushing a very privileged narrative though, and how that yes, for what, but that's for clicks, right? It's for it's to get people to buy products because that's how they make their money.
Yeah.
And when your demographic isn't people who, you know, who maybe have a lower income or who aren't racing, who aren't trying to do triathlons, like those people aren't going to spend the money. So they're going to target their demographic for a certain type of demographic. But the issue there is that it makes cycling inaccessible. So because knowledge needs to be accessible. Knowledge needs to be accessible. So that's one of the important things about disseminating information. People need to see it to be it. And I know that sounds so cliche, but they do.
It's true. We talk about it all the time. You got to have the poster on the wall that shows you what you can go get.
100%.
Exactly. And people need to see, not just see it to be it, but like see themselves. They need to see stories that they can connect with and that they can relate with.
Yeah.
So creating something like a zine would hopefully disrupt something like that, would disrupt those narratives, because not everyone is a middle-aged white dude trying to race a bike on a weekend. And
sure.
Not only that, because it makes cycling inaccessible, those narratives make cycling inaccessible, they also don't talk about the issues in cycling that don't have to do with sport, right? So we need to talk about issues of, you know, vehicle violence. We need to talk about, you know, our rights as cyclists. We need to talk about including communities who are marginalized. We need to talk about those things because they impact real people who cycle, who do the majority of cycling anyways.
Absolutely. So here's like I have shower thoughts occasionally. I had this shower thought this morning because I knew we would get to this point, right? So all these things that influence the bike industry, right? Colonialism, white supremacy, anti-indigenous sentiment, male superiority, all this BS that has basically created the cycling culture that we have to deal with, right? These things are taught to us in our humanities schools. They were taught to you, Christina, in your humanities classes, right? In the literature you read, in the history we have, all these things are taught to us. Unlearning these things, and figuring this out is hard and important work that we all have to be doing, but you're bypassing all of that because you don't have to speak to John and I. You're trying to speak into communities that need to have someone speak directly to them. And the zine is breaking down the pricing barrier. The zine is breaking down the story barrier. You're pulling away all of the other pieces of the tapestry that you're going directly into the community, and you can provide that community directly with this information. Is that part of the secret sauce why you feel like a zine can break some of this crap that's been layered on us for so many years?
Absolutely. One of the goals that I have with the zine is to change the way we talk about our narratives, because of things like white supremacy, colonialism, and sexism, and et cetera, we as people, we internalize those things, right? Like, especially for POC, we internalize those things. So like one thing we could talk about is that we can all relate on is looking like a cyclist, that stuff is very deeply embedded in white cis heteronormatives. And especially when it comes to body weight, especially in the way that bikes are developed, the way that images are out there, models, wearing kit, clothing, etc. All those things come into play in the way that imagery is shared in media. So the thing is, the way we internalize that inhibits us from being able to be part of something as well, because we don't see ourselves, right? So when we challenge those ideas and those norms through sharing our own stories, we're saying none of those things, those aren't about us. That is about upholding a system that benefits from oppressing you and benefits from making you feel like you have to lose weight, making you feel like you're not a cyclist because you don't look like to go buy a bunch of tech and all this other stuff. And so the way we change the narrative is by challenging certain ideas that we either have internalized, by the way that we tell our stories about our relationship to whether it's our body, whether it's the land that we're cycling on, or whether that's talking about our mental health, whether that's talking about the communities that we're building to build inclusivity. Those are hopefully will change the narrative of what a cyclist is or what cycling is, if that makes sense.
Because it totes makes sense.
Yeah. So yeah,
perspective.
I mean, yeah. I'm sitting here thinking like, going through the pandemic and things like that. Doug and I have been having a lot of conversations lately about just feeling disconnected because neither of us are racing anymore, and the COVID-19 is a real thing. Like it's not necessarily testing positive for the actual strain, but like feeling like I'm not doing as good of a job taking care of myself. I'm not at race weight or whatever it is. And like sitting here listening to this, I'm like, okay, so it's these sort of things are what not that they're all contributing to, but like they're contributing to me making me feel like I'm not as connected to the cycling world as I was, a year ago, or, looking at all of the images and everyone is like rail thin and it's like all of those things that you aspire to be as a fit, healthy person. And, there's no conversation in those ads about, is that person dealing with mental illness, or how is their like suicidal thoughts, but they look rad, they look amazing in their kit, and they're on a really dope bike.
But you've been told that that's what looks rad.
Right. And they have a smile on their face,
and
so they're probably happy. Right. So it's all of that. So this is my question, is for the folks that are listening to this that say, I want to be an ally, I want to be a part of this. I don't know. I always approach it, and I always try and put myself in the position of going to an extreme. Is I don't expect, you don't expect, Doug doesn't expect any of our listeners, anybody watching this, anybody that discovers this in the future to go out and be a world changer, to be a world crusher. But what are some of the small things on a day-to-day basis that people can enact in their way that they engage with bikes, in the way that they engage with other people in discussing or talking about bikes, or just in their day-to-day experiences dealing with other humans, that can help chip away at these things, knowing full well that we're probably still going to be having this conversation when the three of us are getting our whole Doug to go into the ground.
Hey, are we getting a communal hole? Is this like how this works?
I don't know.
Like,
we're all in it together. It's a big community.
Yeah, it's cool. I mean,
it'll be a dope tree though. Like if that's the case, like you think about all that the rich nutrients that are going in the ground at one time.
This tree is gonna be excellent.
Exactly. Well, I think you have to have radical empathy and kindness when you're listening to people's stories. First and foremost, I think I feel like we live in an era, and I know we've talked about this earlier with the critical thinking isn't as sharp as it is. Like we just passively consume things that we're reading. We passively consume images, and that's really dangerous, actually, because we're not critically thinking about the way that a message we need to reflect. So like self-reflection is a really important tool to build. And I know not everybody has that.
Hard tool to build. It's very difficult to like be able
scary.
to look inside and analyze that, because you got to break stuff down. Yeah, John's right. It's scary.
It's scary. But having what do we call it? We call it a mental kit tool. And in my family, it's just being able to like self-reflect and to be compassionate about somebody telling their story is really important, because we're not all going to have the same experiences. So we need to listen first and foremost is to listen, but also be able to extend kindness and compassion to other people, especially people who come from marginalized identities, and to listen as well. Listening is a really good skill to build too. It's a lot of people want to talk a lot, and it's hard to get the whole picture when we're trying to interject into someone's story all the time. It's hard to understand also and to empathize with another person when we're not listening. But also as an ally, and even the word ally is really weird, sits very weird with me.
It's fraught for sure. Yeah, it's hard to figure out a better term. We got to come up with community. Let's figure out a better term for what that could be. We got to come with a better term.
We've got accomplices, which is a very popular
that
one.
Seems weird. Seems like we're gonna murder someone in the night.
Everything
like,
is like really...
Christina, we will move bodies for you. We will move bodies.
Yeah.
Wait, I didn't say that on the show. We will not move bodies. That's not a thing I said on the show.
Yeah,
allegedly.
all these words are a little too militant, I think.
Correct. Yeah.
Yes, they are. And yeah, the thing with allyship though is that people can dip in and out of allyship when they want to, right? So like, and that's the thing of privilege, is that you can it could be conditional, and we need our community to not treat others as a transaction. That's what I would call it. But in terms of like what we could do is obviously listen, amplify people's stories, support communities that are trying to do grassroots organizing. And I'm a really big fan of grassroots organizing, because I really do think that they create the spaces and they create the solutions that communities, especially marginalized communities, really need, where you're not having some sort of like local government try to have this prescribed detail of what they should do. I think communities already know what they need to do. They just need people to trust them to do the right thing anyways. But just amplifying their stories, just actively supporting the community, and to also pass the mic. So I think one thing, especially in cycling media, is we can pass the mic on to other people, because we've heard the same stories over and over and over again. We don't need them anymore. They're irrelevant. I'm just telling you, zines are like 10 years ahead of you. Let's move on.
Oh, trust me, I have read many of your works, and the stories being told by the people in your publications are next level, and things I actually identify with, because it's a human experience. All the other stuff is whatever. It's a human experience.
Well, and let's be frank, like there's a reason that elite athletes are elite athletes. They are the 1% of the 1% of the 1% that can make a living doing a thing, whether it's basketball or cycling. And and I know that you want to have that poster up on the wall of something to aspire to, but defining your entire community based on that 1% is insane. The fact that everybody needs to look like a pro cyclist, that everybody needs to think like a pro cyclist to just ride a bike. And even if you bought a $100 bike from Walmart and you took the time to actually rebuild it because they probably didn't build it correctly, and you're using it to commute to your job every day, that's never something that's going to show up in a mass media Hearst magazine. But there are a lot more folks doing that than there are paying their mortgage pedaling a bicycle. Straight up. Like, if the entire industry wants to grow, that's the only way that it grows, is actually acknowledging that the majority of folks don't look like a pro cyclist. I was gonna say a name, but it's not relevant. It's insert, late 20-something white dude here that's super skinny wearing a pro kit with a bunch of logos on it, riding a $12,000 bike. Like, I know we say it all the time that we all need to get rid of that image, but from a pure business perspective, the pie is way larger for the people that actually eat pie.
Yep.
So here's a question I have for you, and I've got two like more meaty ones. Zines, by nature, they are small and insertive, right? They put themselves into a place that they're welcome to some extent, right? The place that they're going to be appreciated. How do you see them and their effectiveness, like, versus visibility, right? There's impact into the community, but do you feel that they're still allowing the larger cycling community to understand and see their impact, or is that not even a consideration? I mean, you've done some collaborations like Sisu and whatnot, which is just absolutely brilliant. Bought that immediately because what a beautiful book that is. But do you feel that the zine just continues to function in its space, or do you feel that there's a space where larger visibility makes it more impactful?
I think the zine is good in its space. I don't wish for the zine to become any bigger than what it is, because that's not the nature of zines. The nature of zines is they come out randomly, and there's no timeline. It doesn't function under colonial time. It doesn't function in these boundaries and these marketing schemes. I want the zine to just be as is. I've grown that thing organically, through zero ad support, through
right no Facebook marketing campaigns,
no
right.
marketing campaigns, but it's helped a lot to be able to do these small collabs, or these collabs like with Sisu, and that's where I would like to keep the zine, is just small and doing it, disrupting in places when it needs to disrupt, because I think that's always the hopeful effect that zines have, is they just pop in, they make all this mess, they shake things up, and then they disappear.
It's like a native plant.
Exactly.
It comes in, it goes exactly where it is best suited in a moment and in a time period, and it's beautiful, and it changes the landscape for a moment, and then it goes dormant until it's needed again.
Exactly. And that's kind of how I see the zine right at this point right now.
So I guess I'll follow up with that is do you, from that, I can kind of glean that your thoughts on the kind of total media sphere is that zines aren't there's not going to be a silver bullet for all of this, but they do play a very specific role. So what does kind of the rest of the landscape look like then, in terms of how do those continue to influence in their kind of small corners, but then how do they start to infect a little bit more of the, you know, the existing landscape of like, it is hard to compete with a distribution list that you know, Rodale or Hearst or whoever owns that whole thing now owns, when, you know, you're fighting something that you're making yourself. Like, what other items can go into that arsenal to start to spread a little bit more fully?
That's a really good question, but I think we're in a really critical time right now where we do need alternatives. We were talking about social media earlier. Zines will always stay relevant for the fact that they can't be co-opted, where they can't be co-opted by media,
except by your Kinko's guy.
except by your Kinko's guy, and then
Kinko's guy will jack your stuff up, print it on like 11 by 17, and you're like, what are you doing? This is supposed to be 8.5 by 11, bro. Yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, so besides Kinko's guy, they will always still, like, will never be able to be co-opted because they can't be hyper commercialized. They don't want to compete with the big guys either. There's just not the nature of it. However, I do think that we are in a really critical time where, like, social media has become this next big thing out of media, right? Like, people are creating so many different platforms to try to get information out, to try to disseminate information. However, even those platforms are being censored. Even those platforms are, the algorithms are really not working for small businesses, one, but also not working for, you know, for like very progressive thought, as well. And they are very functional for a very specific type of body type on you know, on Instagram as well, the influencer type in the face and yada yada. So I think zines will always stay relevant. They have stayed relevant for a long time, especially amongst marginalized communities, and they have stayed very relevant to helping us get out information, and especially during movements. When there's movements happening, we don't want information being shared on media that could be police or that could be censored. So I think they'll always stay relevant in that way. However, there are people who, you know, things to have under your arsenal is always, you know, always have, you know that zines will always be an accessible form to disseminate information, first and foremost. But also trying to use other mixed media as well would be really good, whether that's art, whether that's other DIY types of publications as well. If I really don't want people to think that social media is the all and be all of ways to get information out or ways to share their stories, but I still do think that blogging is still relevant. I know that sounds crazy.
Yeah, no, it's not crazy. I mean, it's kind of the original social media to some extent.
Exactly. I do think that
so was writing books back in the day, right? Like when you were like, oh, I'm Baudelaire, I would like to tell you about my world.
But I do think, you know, because of the censorship nature of social media, that, and Instagram keeps going down, or Facebook, you know, like we have those moments and times where these things shut off, and we don't know if they will be permanently shut off in the future. But just speculating that if you're looking for alternative communities to connect with, find other ways outside of social media, whether that's through creating your own space within your community to share information, whether you're teaching skill building courses, or whether you're sharing information through a blog or through a website, it's always good to know that social media isn't the all to sharing information or to building communities. There's other forms of accessing information outside of the websites.
I think we've become so reliant on that, right? Like Tom from MySpace, when he went away, we were all like, oh yeah, and then Facebook came around. We figured it out. But all of that is not real community, right? All of that is not legitimate community. It is pseudo community. It is parasocial relationships. It's all of these things we've built, right? Now, granted, parasocial relationships, Christina, brought you to this show, and I'm very glad that you're here because of it, because we knew some people and happened to connect in that way. And that's good. Those things should be lauded in the fact that we're able to cross-pollinate communities across vast distances. But the work that's being done in your community can only be done by you. You can't rely on Facebook to solve your local problems. You have to spend that time curating those things in your space, whether that's a zine or whether that's, you know, public meetings or potlucks or whatever. I love the thought of not trying to solve it with Mark Zuckerberg's one-shot kill. Here, I've made you Instagram. Now everyone looks like you. This is not how this gets solved.
Yeah, and it's crazy to like how there was such a shift of that, like where people were like, you know, Instagram kind of became like this microblog world, and all of a sudden it went from like being able to have like a blog, which you had, obviously you're sharing your skills, your knowledge of what you've learned through something with you, and you do have even a small community through that. But how it shifted from going from there to this social media micro blogging sphere, where even now it like the hyper I would say like just the hyper image of like being an influencer has all of a sudden became this idea of like, oh, they know, and they know this, and they know how to be that, and they're that. And so it's just a very weird way of consuming media. So I look at it the same way. I look at social media the same way I look at magazines, because I do feel like when we're on social media, we are being advertised to. Like,
for sure.
Yeah, you know, we're like promoting a product, or, you know, just like it's just the same thing. It's like flipping through the magazine, and
well, that's the whole underpinning foundation of the valuation of social media is you interact with it, and you interact with a bunch of stuff, and then they mine that data to then sell shit back to you that is based on what you like it's incredibly effective
every time,
and
every time these assholes,
and it is all based on
so
very deep psychology and very like deep human based reaction things that are well beyond my understanding. But the fact of the matter is they're Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, they're all hammer, wrench, screwdriver, like they're all tools to telling a story. And if you put all of your eggs in one of those baskets, it's like talking about this idea of just like hearing you talk about the Instagram influencer idea. The word for me, it just like makes my skin crawl. But in thinking about everything that we've talked about and going back to it, the Instagram influencer is absolutely no different than the guy on the bike that I was talking about that has, you know, single digit body fat. And that's a snapshot of that guy's 24-hour day that was, you know, 1 millisecond that was caught on camera. It's not talking about the other 23 hours, 59 minutes, and, you know, 99 100ths of a second that are the rest of his day. That could be a complete shit show. No different than, you know, anything else. Whereas this is long form. You can't really hide in a podcast. You can't really hide on a live stream. You can't really hide in a blog if you're actually contributing and like lending yourself to the blog. No different than somebody lending their story to a zine. So I think it's you can't fix everything with a screwdriver. You can't fix everything with a hammer. But
You fix
I
a lot
mean,
of stuff with a hammer, to be clear.
you can. I knew that was coming. And if you can't fix it, get a bigger one. But the premise of it is the same. Is that like, and the funny thing about it is I feel like we're getting to a point as humans where a lot of people acknowledge like, yeah, I follow this person and I feel like a lot of what they do is full of shit, but I still like their posts and I'm still influenced by them. Like, we're acknowledging what's happening and how vapid it is, but we're still like, so like, that's what I'm saying. Like, all of this stuff is underpinned on deep psychology, and there's a reason that Facebook has psychologists and psychiatrists and all of these really smart brain people on staff, because they sit down with all the UX designers and they decide what's coming next. Because it's all based on what triggers that brain chemistry. I forget what the dopamine or whatever the brain chemical is that like triggers when you get a like or somebody comments on your post, and it's just a little drug hit.
It's called dopamine, John. Those of us with ADHD are very well aware of this. You have it too, John. You just haven't realized what it's called.
But I mean, that's the other dangerous aspect of it too, is that we do spend a lot of time, especially since COVID. I'm sure a lot of us spent the beginning of the pandemic have spent a lot more time on our devices. And that's the scary bit about all of this to me, is how isolated we've all become, that we spend so much time investing in our parasocial relationships, and the way that influences the way we see people or the way we interact with content online. That's a very dangerous line, because it there's less what I've experienced, especially managing the CYCLISTA Zine account, is that there's, especially as a woman of color, the experience that I have to go through to make myself available constantly to whatever DMs I get, whatever messages I get. I have boundaries that I've had to really enforce in that space. But there's this assumption, especially when you're online, as you know, especially as a woman, there's a lot more, I would say, abuse that comes online. And having to go through that, you really get a sense of people's entitlement to your time and your energy and your knowledge and your space. And I've learned to just turn it all off. Just no notifications. I don't accept DMs. You've got to email me like a freaking decent human being.
With the proper subject addressing, right? You got to like put your address in the header.
Construct a paragraph.
Yeah.
Actually, I want it written out in a letter.
Make it into a zine and then send it. That's the only way that Christina accepts communications from this point forward.
Exactly. But you go through this experience online and you just think like, what the heck has social media like done to us? It's really not been good for us as far as building healthy boundaries of the way that we interact with media. So I still always think that zines will be relevant. I think they will always be amazing tools for us to have when we say like, we've had enough of this and I'm going to a flip phone. Zines will always be there. They will always be accessible. They will always have knowledge that is accessible. They will always be a space for us to express ourselves, to build community, because zinesters, we all know each other anyways, and we're trading all the time. And it's like a small culture and a niche within itself. So we know how to find each other. We know where to go when we're trying to build something together. where I think that online we're building parasocial relationships that we're not always building authentic relationships in that space too.
So you said something at the beginning of our conversation when we were talking about the last generation, and we were talking kind of about your origins. And this is kind of one before we like get to the last question, we pay bills and do that. I want to hit on this because this really sat with me for a good while. You said that the lost generation was artists and people creating literature and shaping a new world after war. We've just gone through a massive cataclysm worldwide, and not just affecting Europe or North Africa and Europe, right? We have gone through a worldwide cataclysm. It's not over yet, to be clear. Do you feel that there is this same kind of shift and this opportunity or this different space for us to continue to move forward past this point in time? Do you feel that this is a demarcation for us as we come out of a pandemic that's affected the entire world? Do you feel that shift?
Yes. And I do believe that we have to, even if we feel helpless, or even if we feel like nothing is going to change, we have to continually imagine a better world. Like, we can't give in to apathy, because apathy is a really dangerous tool to keep us inactive from building world building, and mobilizing us from doing anything. But also that imagining futures is going to help us shift the current state of things as well, even if we're not doing them as a global collective level. As long as we're doing them as a community, that can help with our collective care. It can help with our collective imagination of pushing things into a different direction. So the language and the dialogues are always going to shift, especially in times of turbulence.
Yeah.
But we can't let apathy get the best of us in our community, because that is how the system works. They want you to stay glued, and they want you to stay inactive.
Yeah.
And they don't want you to do anything.
And here's the hopeful piece for me, is that for as long as we have been breathing, walking, engaging, creating fire, whatever, humans have been communal. We've been taking care of each other in various stages. Even depending on what your belief structure is of what we came from, we've always done it as a group. It's never like there is no, one off because that branch dies. And I think this is like, I love that question, because I think it's an ellipses right now, because I think a lot of us right now are feeling like the frog in the boiling water. It's consistently gotten hotter and hotter over the last 8 years, really, of things continuing to feel not right. You're like, that's not right, but I can go back to putting my head in the sand and feeling oblivious to it, because that's my privilege. And then you get hit in the head again, and you get hit in the head again, and then 2020 comes around, and ain't nobody hiding anymore. And the amount of conversations that I've had with folks that are acknowledging what mental struggle looks like, what understanding that we as communities are broken looks like. I mean, we're not even talking about the bike world right now. We're just talking about the human race. Bikes is the exact same thing. All of this stuff is the exact same story, but that's where I feel like Facebook goes away, Instagram goes away, Twitter goes away, whatever the next thing is. Like, if Tom decides that he wants to reboot MySpace, cool. But we're still, the three of us, the thousands of folks that are going to listen to this, whatever, we're still going to be a community. We're still going to find ways to take care of each other. But to your point, Christina, is the thing that you always need to keep the ball that every single person listening to this needs to keep their eye on is to not fall to complacency, to constantly challenge yourself around, not necessarily did I do enough, but did I do the right things? Am I putting myself in a position to be useful to my fellow humans?
Yeah. Am I holding perspective for something outside of myself?
Yeah. And you said something earlier on also that I want to kind of come back to, and then I'll let Doug lead us into the ad read. So hang out with us. We've got one more question for you, but for anyone that's struggling to find ways to connect to this, the easiest way that I can make people understand is I think we've all had that person in our life, that colleague, your uncle, somebody in your family, whatever it is. Generally speaking, it's a male, because this is definitely more of a male tendency, but the person that when you're talking to them, they start talking over you mid-sentence, and it's clear that they weren't really listening to that you were saying. They were just waiting for their turn to talk, and they thought you were done, so then they could talk. Keep your eye on that ball, because that's the closest for those of us that look like Doug and I, that do have this privilege of kind of living in a world that was built for us. Those are the micro feelings that are things that people live with on a daily basis, every second of every day. And I feel like the more that we can focus as a group on those things and not focus on the guy in the Rafa ad that I wasn't saying it was a Rafa ad earlier, but I guess now I made it a Rafa ad.
Now.
I feel like we all knew what I was talking about. But like the more that we can focus on those things and actually actively listening to our fellow humans and our colleagues and trying to understand where somebody comes from, if you don't understand and you're getting frustrated by their actions, like try and understand how they got to the algebra that got them to where they are and the decision that they made, and try and have some of that compassion, because the more that you're that person that's metaphorically talking over somebody mid-sentence, the more hopeless that we're all gonna be. Whether it's bikes, it's politics, it's Ukraine, it's all of these things that, like, just try.
Yeah. And it's a real struggle. I think also to the point of using your voice, and I know that this could be something really helpful for a lot of folks, because it's what helped me, was that when you're using your voice, think of it like, taking the lane. We're always saying take up space. Like, you got to look at your voice the same exact way, because that was really the only way that I learned to advocate for myself. Whether that was advocating for myself on the street, advocating for myself with the work, with work that I've worked in tech. I know what it's like working in a male dominant field, being overtalked all the time, knowing how to combat that, but also knowing how to communicate, is such a critical skill. But knowing how to use your voice is a powerful tool to have, and zines really do provide a source for using your voice when you feel like the world doesn't hear you, that you have something amazing to say, or an idea or a skill or anything that that can help another person. A zine is a perfect way to also use your voice. So it's crazy that all of, we can say all these things might look separate, but they all intersect in some way. And advocating for your voice is such a big thing to have as a skill in life and on the road, because advocating for your voice and for your truth is not a joke. And when people are trying to express something that they've gone through, a trauma that they've gone through, an experience that they've gone through, extending them the respect and the space to tell that is a really powerful thing, because there's other people who can relate to that too. And we can all, like you say, we're a community. We can all help each other find our way through things.
I love that. I love that. It is about extending people the space to tell their things. And I love that that's what you do with CYCLISTA Zine. Like, it is a beautiful space that you hold for other people. And for those of you, if you are not familiar and you do not know, go buy it when it comes out, get it shipped to you. And if you want to make a zine because you got something to say, guess who can help you figure out how to do that? That's Christina. Oh, it's Christina. Christina's real good at helping you learn how to do that. Runs all sorts of awesome programs to do that. So that if you want to learn how to create your own publication, like, we need more of this. Like, when I was growing up, and granted, we didn't have the internet in the same way we do now, but like, if you went to New York, you got zines out of New York and you knew what was happening in New York. But if you were in Connecticut's hardcore scene, you knew what was happening in Connecticut because you bought the Connecticut zines, right? Like, and you traded them across the Northeast because that's how you knew what was happening in the other communities. Build a zine in your community. If you've got words to say, the opportunity is there.
Yeah.
All right. Man, this has been freaking excellent. Like, we could probably do 4 to 6 to 12 hours.
Yeah.
We're going to have like podcast marathon time. We'll have to have you back to do more of this. That being said, I'm going to put a pin in this piece of the conversation. We're going to ask you our final question, which, because you're a good Pebble, you know, is that what you want the Pebbles to take away with them from our conversation. But we got to pay bills because, yes, this does cost money, and we are beholden to the commercial
the overlords,
the commercial overlords that we talked about and bashed this whole time. But our commercial overlords
it's everybody but them. That's really what
commercial
we're saying
overlords
here.
are benevolent and kind and committed to the community, and we love them tremendously. So thank all of you for being here this week. You're amazing. All of you are the reason that we keep doing this, and allowing us all your support allows us to continue to make TGL so successful. In addition to supporting the show in all the myriad ways you do, sharing, becoming Patreon members, whatever, we also appreciate you taking care of these fine folks, because they provide you with awesome things that you can then support the show with. It's a whole circle of care where we take care of each other.
And first and foremost is Be Free Ride Bike Cycling Apparel. This is fully customized kit tailored to your specific needs. Now, say this a lot, but what does that mean? It's not just putting your MS Paint drawing on a jersey. It's picking the fabrics, it's picking the cut, it's how do you want it to fit? Do you want it to have a collar? Do you not want it to have sleeves? Do you want this fabric versus that fabric? Like, it is truly kit that is built to whatever you want it to be, so it can be for everybody and it's for everybody. So head over to bfrbcycling.com and take a look at how they can help you and your entire crew, team, yourself, whoever, get outfitted for 2022, 2023, whenever you're downloading this in 3023. Like, if you're still riding bikes and you need kit,
do you think
hopefully it
still
still
have
exists.
Apple Podcasts in 2030,
Maybe.
32
I don't
or
know.
32, whatever it is?
I'm sure
Right.
Rogan will still be alive by then, so
Yeah,
I'm sure podcasts will still
he's
exist.
so juiced, he's gonna live
Yeah,
forever. I'm
yeah,
pretty
he's like a
sure.
Twinkie.
Basically, in so many different ways. Dear God, oh my God, I am horrified.
I figured you'd like
by
that.
Thank you, John. Also, a massive thanks to our awesome friend Dana Grimper Brothers Coffee. Been sipping on a little bit of the old Grimper all the time. Follow a link in our show notes and head on over to the Grimper Brothers website and get yourself on premium hand roasted coffees right now. But these coffees give back to community. They give back to people and causes and things within cycling. People that need support. Dan does an amazing job of curating that list, and Dan is on point with all of that. So Go on over to grimporbrothers.com, sign up for subscription service. You can get yourself an extra free bag of coffee for the subscription service if you sign up right now, and support some awesome things in cycling, but also get delicious coffee, because this life is hectic and you need caffeine to survive. So make caffeine work for the things you care about.
You know, the thing that I feel like we always short with Grim Poor Brothers is, yes, Dan is bringing a lot of attention and bringing a lot of impressions to causes and bringing them to people's attention. But the thing that's going missed is a portion of the proceeds for the specific whatever blend you pick. If you pick a cause A, there's real dollars going to cause A from that purchase. So yes, it's impressions. Yes, it's increased frequency in the message and getting all of that stuff out, and that's important. But then there's like the true where the rubber meets the road, and there's money going to those causes and going to support those things. So buy great coffee, support great causes, go to the website, choose the one that means something to you, and get some amazing coffee.
I just thought you were going to say Dan's cute.
I mean, yeah. I mean, all of our sponsors are. Like, there's not really a podium. They're all on the top step.
They're all adorable. We love them all.
And last but not least is Hand Up Gloves. We talked about it a little bit in the intro. They just dropped their spring 2022 collection, and it is huge. There's new socks, new pants, new gloves, new flannels, new hoodies, new caps. Like, basically everything about it is brand new. So go check it out. Click the link in the show notes. Use code Pebble $sign to save 10% off everything in store. Find yourself things for golf, for snow sports. If there's still snow in your area.
My in-laws are getting new golf gloves this year. It's what's happening.
Good. Or cycling stuff. They still make cycling stuff, and it's sweet. So go buy some cycling stuff from Hand Up.
It's cool. All the hands.
Yeah.
Huge thank you to all you Pebbles. As always, we're so stoked to have you. We love hearing from you. Cannot do this without all of your support. Visit, subscribe, engage, do all those things. Go to thegravelot.com. Follow us on all the social feeds, all the places that we've just bashed for the past hour and a half. Been like, all this stuff is garbage. Guess what? We still have to feed the algorithm in order to make sure that we still show up. So
still need a screwdriver, and we still need a hammer.
Yeah, these are the tools, so we must use them. Join us every other Tuesday, except on the Tuesdays that John is violently ill and unable to leave his bathroom floor.
Those are in the past.
John, I'm so glad you are feeling better. It was challenging, but engage with us on all our platforms. We're happy to have you as always.
And if you guys enjoy the intro music, the waiting, I keep calling it the hold music. It's like the waiting room. I enjoy turning the live stream on and then just listening to the waiting room music. Like it like puts me where I need to be for the show. But if you guys like it, that is from composer. His name is Water. So huge thanks to him for allowing us to be able to actually use his art in our show. Like that is such a blessing for us. Like we could not be more thankful for him. So go check him out on all the major platforms of music, or click the link in the show notes below and it'll take you straight there.
Yeah, he's got some new stuff out right now. So
yeah,
check it if you have not. It's excellent. So Christina, final question to wrap it all up for the Pebbles. What do you want the Pebbles to take home from this conversation? Hopefully the first of many. What do you want them to take home from our conversation this evening?
It's a good question. I would say your voice matters. Your voice absolutely matters. But also just ride your bike. Just ride your bike, and everything else, the voices that come in outside of do I look like a cyclist? Do I feel like this? Do I do this, do that? Just don't worry about those things. There's plenty of space for all of us to thrive in community. So that's what comes off on top of my head. But please support the zine so we can pay our writers as well.
1,000%.
Yeah, so
go buy the zine.
So
Support CYCLISTA Zine.
Yeah, we'll put the link in the show notes to the website. We'll also put a direct link in the show notes to the shop so you can go straight there and purchase something today. There have been so many times when you've been answering a question tonight that I've had, like, and maybe it is because I'm feeling better, but like I've had visuals come to mind of like with the way that you describe things literarily. They like make me think of mental images. And for some reason, when you were talking about, this is probably me sharing too much, but whatever, we're done with the podcast. But when you were like, oh, don't whatever those voices that you hear come in that tell you aren't this or you're not that, just like ignore them. And I was like envisioning like the 1960s version of Batman where they're fighting bad guys and like the screen goes a bright color and it's like paff, pow, biff. And I was like, that's the perfect visual. When one of those thoughts comes in, think of Adam West and then pow. Yeah, it's perfect.
Yeah, great.
I love it.
I
Now,
love
You're welcome, everybody. Welcome into
welcome
like
to John's.
I know
John's
you said it
segment.
earlier as though I don't realize that I have some form of ADD, but yeah, I know.
Yeah,
it's
bud.
fine.
Yeah, bud. Yeah, for real.
It's
We're
fine.
on this trip together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're on this trip.
Same
This is
team. Same
our-
team.
Into the market together.
This is why we're friends. There's many reasons why we're friends. This is definitely one of them, Christina, revealed tonight on the podcast.
Yeah.
No, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for all your words tonight. Just absolutely appreciate everything you're doing in the community.
Yes.
Folks, go support everything Christina's doing. Follow them on all the social media that we all hate, because that it is an important place for us to disseminate information, as well as also the awesome stuff that Christina's doing at the zine. So please go support them. Christina, thank you. This has really meant a lot. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you. Thank you as well. I appreciate it. I love this conversation. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Pebbles, that's all for this week. So be sure to subscribe, follow, and engage, because as we say, decisions and trails are, wait, what?
You got it.
I had it.
You were
Decisions and
nailing it.
trails are made by those who show up, because if we don't see you on the trails this week, see you next time. Bye, John.
Bye, Doug.
Thank you.